Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, brought to you by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm Randy Johnston, your host, with co-host Brian Tankersley. And we've been mulling this next topic over for some time, and we've discussed it in our consulting in CPA firms for some time. And that is, do you buy a suite from the major publishers, the CCH, Wolters, Kluwer, Thomson, Reuters type of companies, or do you buy best of breed? And of course, there's a couple of other companies that would like to have you think that they've got a suite. Intuit certainly falls in that category. Iris falls in that category. And there's more that are trying to build full suites. But in our line of reasoning, generally, we're looking for a one-stop shop that would let you get almost everything you need, from practice management to document management to workflow to tax to audit platforms to guidance to research. And you'll notice I just described pretty much what the Thomson Reuters and Wolters Kluwer companies have traditionally done. So, Brian, that's a lot of setup again, but do you have some thoughts on why you might choose an all-in-one suite versus best of breed?
Well, there's a lot that you have to do to make the independent things all talk to each other. Okay. So it's for the convenience of the data flowing back and forth, with you having to do minimal things to make it work. So you don't have to do things more than once in more than one application. So again, you look at this, and the CCH Access Suite has this. Again, you Firm Flow and Go File Room, and again, Thomson's Engagement Manager. Again, the idea here is that you have one throat to choke for making all this stuff work together. It also, in most cases, it will have some similarity in the look and feel. It's not always going to be super consistent, because many times with Thomson and CCH, they've acquired some, if not all, of these products, or there've been different development teams, like Thomson with their the early days of Thomson. There were development teams in Dallas. There was one in Dexter, and those two didn't talk to each other very much. And that's part of why, by the way, that they're probably discontinuing the File Cabinet CS product, because it's going to take too much to get it to a cloudified or whatever. But as we look at this, though, again, the idea here is having everybody in one portal does make a certain part of it easy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And another concept on this, just again, we're not trying to rehash old things. We're trying to think forward with you on this. It turns out that Brian and I had done an accounting firm operations technology survey nationally for a good number of years, and it was statistically valid. And we saw the trend towards best of breed. But I got a little bit of a shock, I will say, when I was consulting for a firm alliance in a partner level retreat where independently, three of the partners said, all this best of breed stuff we've been trying to do, it takes an awful lot of work to make it all work together. I think we're going to go back to suites. And I was like, well, that's an interesting conclusion. And I asked why. And so over the last 6 months, I've continued to reflect on this issue. And again, we don't want to say, oh, you can only do suite. But what we want you to do is be thoughtful about what a suite can do for you. And if you've got the ability to actually maintain all these best of breed integrations.
Yeah, and there are costs. You know all-in-one suites are not all rainbows and unicorns. Okay. There are, again, you want to be careful with the all-in-one suites, because there are a lot of tools that may not be exactly what you want. Okay. So you're picking from the cafeteria instead of picking off of a menu, and you have what the cafeteria has. And if you don't like what the cafeteria has, then you're out of luck. The exit bill also matters with this. Getting divorced from these legacy vendors and getting your data out gets harder and pricier every year. You also want to make sure that the tools will do the job that you need, especially if you've got specialty practice areas like business valuation and lit support and advisory. The tools may not directly make, because you can get advisory. There are many different models that make up advisory, and your advisory may be completely different from somebody else's advisory. So again, that's what we have here. Again, the other problems we've had, and we've seen some of these where there are data centers that go down and it takes down an entire firm during tax season or immediately after tax season. We've seen situations where that happened. And then finally, you have the Ghostbusters problem. Who you're going to call if you get a renewal price and it is well in excess of what you really want to pay for this and what you're willing to pay for it. Your option is to re-implement everything, and so the cost of a divorce grows geometrically as you have more and more stuff on a platform.
And I think one of the motivations for many of these discussions was pricing. We know that there's been very aggressive pricing from all vendors, increasing the cost to you and your firms. Not saying those aren't justified. I just know that they're real. And, as you're looking at your licensing expense and you're thinking about new spend for artificial intelligence or, other legacy things that you might need, like training and so forth, you just are maybe feeling a bit of a squeeze on that. On the other hand, you can go down the path of really building your own stack, the best in breed approach.
Yeah, and so in this best in breed approach, you're really picking the stuff that meets exactly what you want. Okay. And it's very much like the difference in buying in building a race car versus buying a car off the lot. Okay. With the race car, you can get, if you're doing, you can get the special tires you need for drag racing, or you can get the tools, you can get the steering rack that works perfectly for turning left every single time 500 times in this situation. On the other hand, when you're getting something off the rack, you're getting something that works for general purposes, but it's not for everything. And so again, where there are these things, people are setting up these bespoke suites of tools where the integration is a little more uncertain, a little more technically complex. But again, they will typically handle the messy workflows that the general suites will miss. So, you're thinking about Giraffe for forecasting, or you're thinking about, some other kind of niche tech to keep your firm from falling behind. The idea here is that you can use the things that, the optimal applications for everybody. And then if you've got the sophistication to link them all together, then it can stop a lot of the daily headaches. Now, there still will be data flow headaches that have to be dealt with. But again, the tools for that have gotten significantly better. You look at what's happened with Zapier, what's happened with data prep. You look at what's happened with Microsoft Flow and now called Power Automate and some of the other tools like that. Zoho Flow, certainly. Those are all better, and they do the low code, no code integration that a lot of folks are looking for.
And so this idea of it getting easier is good, but notice we didn't say easy. In other words, if you're looking for a big red easy button, that's still not quite the case, but it is notably easier to do these best of breed integrations now than it would have been maybe 2 or 4 or 6 years ago.
Absolutely.
However, you still have to do all of this maintenance, and there are going to be disconnects. And maybe the disconnects are fine for you. I don't know. Now, the other thing that I could have called out earlier on the suites is the expectation of the data flowing back and forth maybe still is not as good as you would like to see. And, Brian and I both look at all these products and we are cognizant to say, would we like it to be better? Yes. Do we ask the vendors frequently to make their products better? Are they trying all the time? Yes and yes. So again, we're not throwing rocks at anybody. We don't want to throw a stone at a single supplier unless they're doing, illegal and illicit stuff. But bottom line is, it's just different approaches. And I don't know which different is better for you.
Yeah. Okay. Now, as we think about the app overload, one of the things that you can do to kind of address this, so that everybody doesn't have 40 different passwords they have to keep up with for the apps they use every day, is you can set up single sign-on using technologies like OAuth so that you don't have to hunt for lost passwords. You've just got the authentication already built in. You also want to stick to a few core tools. Again, it's better than making people learn 5 different ways to solve the same problem. If you have an app drawer and there are things that do the same job, pick one, ditch the other. There are also home bases for this authentication like Okta. It's an easy way to make sure everybody finds what they need to fast. And then you want to think about the switching cost. Okay. Every time somebody jumps from Slack to Carbon, they lose their flow. And there is some loss here. Again, when you hire new people in from other organizations, they're going to have skills in different applications. And there is a learning curve that they're going to have to go through that.
And in many cases, a tool that they used before, they want to use again. So they'll sell you on the concept of using the tool that just works so much better because they were used to it. And, when you look at the way these tools work together, Brian's admonition on getting rid of tools that are duplicative. And what you're going to discover is when you buy different tools, they have overlaps on features. And not every feature is going to be perfect inside the platforms, but you're going to maybe pick one that's good enough as opposed to the best in some particular area. And here I'm just going to pick on something near and dear to both of our hearts, workflow. We might pick a good enough workflow product instead of the one that we think is the best because it's integrated with our systems or whatever the logic is. So don't think that you have to have best of breed. Just think you might have some that are good enough and reduce clutter. Less applications is better than more. And that's another thing that is a big stumbling block with best of breeds is we keep picking band-aids to put on new wounds instead of actually putting on a pair of gloves.
And I will say this, that, in my personal world, one of the things that has been a bee in my bonnet for some time is Adobe Acrobat. Okay. I want to work with PDF files. I don't want to work with Adobe Acrobat. Okay. And part of the challenge, just like some people, you look at Microsoft Office and some people say that, well, I'd really rather work with Apple's Office suite of, digits and, their tools. And there are open source alternatives, certainly, like LibreOffice. Okay. But LibreOffice is clunky. Okay. And so as we're looking at these things, again, the thing you've got to decide is what the things are that you will not part with. Like in my case, it's probably Microsoft Office. Okay. And I have to live with Adobe Acrobat for right now, but I keep praying that Satya is going to come around and say, hey, did you know we've built in PDF editing into Microsoft Office now? So you don't have to buy Adobe Acrobat anymore. That would be a good day for me. But again, figuring this out and then getting that in here is important. Now, you also want to unlock your data because you're having data in these old spreadsheets and clunky legacy systems is a potential liability point for you with data governance. So again, is practice management your home base? You want to check and make sure that that's what it is. Stop typing the same data twice, okay? Because you're going to make mistakes in one or the other, then you're not going to know what's wrong. And then next time you're looking for it, you're going to see the inconsistency and you're going to have to spend twice as much time figuring out which one's right, this one or that one. Again, you think of Power Automate or Zapier or some of the Zoho integration tools as your digital pipes. And the idea here is to let everybody have a single place to find the latest files and the most current ones in there.
So, we always talked about master data, gold data, and there's other names for that. But for many firms, the primary client data either lives in tax or in practice management. Those are the two places that are most commonly there as your master data. And you need to be thoughtful about where you believe your best copy of client information lives.
Yeah. So again, you want to keep things pretty straightforward here for for areas where there aren't a lot of alternatives like tax filings and standard compliance work. Don't kid yourself. Okay. There aren't that, if I'm talking about your average accounting firm, you're probably not going to switch your tax software anytime soon, even if there are advantages to going to it, because there's such pain associated with it. But we can layer additional tools on top of it. We can look at how the tools talk to each other. We can use some of the built-in connectors. Again, you only want to buy the niche models if your main software really can't handle the job. So as an example, there was a client I was working with a few years ago, and they had 2 or 3 clients that were publicly traded partnerships, and they had thousands of K1s they had to send out of those PTPs, and they had to use a different tax software because the one they were using, which will go nameless, would not handle that many different K1s. And so as we're thinking about these things here, I want you to be very careful with it. Again, look at your workflow, see if there are bottlenecks. And again, you want to declare war on those bottlenecks as quickly as you can.
And for many of you, your systems of record is tax data. Okay, well, who's going to have the most capable tax tools in the market? It's going to be the big suite vendors. Wolters, Kluwer, Thomson, Reuters is where most of that's going to live. Now, we understand there's new products coming along, but where is your best data? And you may conclude, oh yeah, we're going to do practice management and switch there. Again, be thoughtful about it is the nature of this particular podcast.
Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about picking tech that grows. Okay. So, again, we want you to look at the roadmaps. We want you to ask the vendors about how they're going to help us use AI. You also want to watch out for those old systems. It's really not fair to ask new graduates coming into the market to use tools that were written before they were born to solve modern problems. And so again, we've got to go through and figure that out. Do your software partners care about the same rules and regs that keep you up at night? Again, the things that cause you to lose your house if you make a mistake are not the same things that they have. And again, you also want to make sure that the vendors are innovating fast enough to support your moving into advisor. Now, with fixing things before they break, with full suites, there is value to having one throat to choke, whether it be a Thomson Reuters or an Intuit or a Wolters Kluwer or an Iris. But you will likely have to juggle several help desks, and there may be quite a bit of hot potato where people say, well, that's their problem or that's somebody else's problem. How much time are you going to spend on the phone or again dealing with these issues? Again, your time is going to grow, is going to at least double when you start managing more than one vendor. Although time can be, because of the way folks are segmented into divisions and other things, that certainly can happen with a single vendor too. Again, you want to lean on dedicated account managers to cut through your red tape or billing or complex setup issues. Okay.
Yeah,
there is complexity here.
I will illustrate with a situation this week, and actually more than one, because we're at the day we're recording this is still in tax season. And we had a firm who could not process tax because of a Microsoft issue. And it's, is that Wolters Kluwer problem or Thomson Reuters problem or Intuit's problem, or is that Microsoft's problem? And how many of you are going to get Microsoft to respond to fix their problem so you can continue processing your tax auditor CAS? And I think the probability of you being able to solve that problem is very low. So again, I watch those. I feel so bad for firms that are having those type of issues. But in many cases, it's beyond the firm's control and beyond the IT team's control.
Yeah. So again, you do want to give yourself several months to settle in when you're moving to a new system, and you're going to want to try to schedule implementations and training prior to busy periods. Again, you can drop in specialized tools that are point solutions in small steps. You can also, if you have broken workflows right now, you can always throw a standalone tool in to fix the gap instead of waiting for a total overhaul. And you want to look beyond the sticker price, okay? Because again, time is still money. And so even though you may be billing based on value, you still want to look at the time and find those bottlenecks in your processes so that you can make them the best that they can be. Now, when you look at your tech stack, again, you want you to look at some of the integrations that are there. Many of you are using tools like QuickBooks and Bill and don't have them integrated. And so you want to make sure, one, where integrations exist, that you are using them where it's possible. Now, one thing you got to watch with built-in integrations is you need to try them and you need to work with them before you go in and you rely on them in production. And part of the reason that that's so critical is that many times you have to use the tools, one tool or the other tool. Like maybe, I had a time and billing software that used to integrate with QuickBooks Desktop 25 years ago. And the problem was I implemented QuickBooks before I implemented the time and billing tool. And the problem was that the time and billing tool required me to set up QuickBooks a certain way for the data to flow. Okay. And you will have situations like that where you need to rationalize that. You may have a solution like that where you have to go back and re-implement it or re-architect the data in an existing tool for these things to work. Now, there are API connectors you can move back and forth, and you can use vibe coding and other things like that with this. You want to stay away from the CSV uploads. They're slow, they have mistakes, there are problems. Does your data really flow both ways in here? And so you need to know which ones are one way, which ones are two way. And finally, in here, you want to find the instances where somebody has to key stuff in more than once, okay? Because that is where your inefficiency is coming from. Now, to own these things, you want to check and see if your tools will read and write, let each other read and write data. Many times there are limitations. For example, in QuickBooks Online, there are certain things that you can't write. Okay. Like writing payroll data to most accounting software packages is limited, if not blocked altogether. You also want to watch out for walled gardens. You want to watch out and make sure that makes the tech stack will work with your custom reports and your daily dashboards. You want to make sure, again, your main vendor isn't blocking rivals just to keep you trapped. Okay, again, that's the thing about the walled garden with Apple is that, Apple went in there and they set up their app store for the iPhone. And then they said, if you want to do anything in here, you have to give us, if you want to sell anything through here, you have to give us 30% of the revenue. Well, the courts have struck that down, but it took 10 or 15 years to make through the courts or actually almost 20 now that I think about it for the courts to get it to that point. And the money for the first 15 years is just gone forever. And so just understand that that's one of the things you have here. Now, for software cost, you want to also look at you want to make sure you're using everything in the big bundle before you pay for the deal. That is, if somebody's not going to use this particular tool, then you want to make sure that it's there. Also, does the price tag pay for itself? You want to watch out for the integration tax in here because many times there will be additional fees. There may be API charges or other kinds of tools here. You may want to lock in lower rates by signing long-term deals, but you want to watch those long-term deals because if you have a merger, you don't want to have to continue to pay even for a tool that the merged firm is not going to use anymore. And that's the danger is that you're effectively taking on a liability that you may not want to continue and beyond the change in control, and so that may drive down the price you get.
And one other comment in that area where you used to get discounts for multi-year agreements, 3-year, 5-year agreements, you could get significant price concessions. We're noticing that the contracts being issued this year no longer have a guarantee of price lock-in. And in fact, there is an escalation clause in many. So where it was a strategy to try to save money by negotiating a long-term deal, now it may actually cost you dollars or certainly not save you what you thought.
Yeah. All right. So when we're looking at this now, you want to turn your practice software into where every client detail lives. Okay. So it could be CRM, it could be a traditional practice management. The issuing of invoices and sending bills may be in ERP. It may, in a tool like Practice ERP. It may be you may be calculating and pricing things in a tool like Ignition and then having it flow into a tool like QuickBooks or something like that. You also want to check the hubs like CCH Access to see if they'll talk to the tools in here. Again, stick to one system and stop typing data twice by tracking work in more than one system. You also want to look at things and see if the platform can handle the load when you handle more advisory services. Will it handle the different ways you need to price and bill and track these systems? And again, look for a dashboard that you have in here that will make boring things feel faster and will make things feel like they're happening more quickly. Now, you do want to also figure out who your ideal partner is. If you do want everything in one place, you can certainly get that from CCH and Thomson, or do you want to get raw power from specialized tools? Again, the question is, do you need this deep automation? Can you handle 5 different vendor contracts and the related support liabilities and training liabilities there? Or do you just want one bill and one set of training? You also need to think about your advisory work because, again, the data supply chain, as you would call it, the data flows supporting advisory are much more important because advisory is a much more proactive service than after the fact bookkeeping and after the fact tax. So you want to be sure that if you're going to set up these things, that you're not, and many of you may look at this and say, oh, well, I'll get somebody offshore just to code the interfaces between all these tools. And you certainly can do that. The problem is who's going to fix it when it breaks. So we have to be realistic about that. Now, you also want to check your tech ROI. You want to see what's actually making you money, what's losing you money. Again, cutting licensing fees does put cash back in your budget, but it may be short-sighted if the tool is being used in particularly critical workflows. The depreciation, you may get to keep a little more of your revenue. Are your best people going to stay in here? Because, again, if you're talking to Gen Z and you're giving them tools straight out of 1979, they're not going to do that. Okay. Also, ditching the heavy server gear does slash the monthly bills you have to pay to keep the lights on. And we're seeing the industry respond by having more robust NASs and other tools like that showing up.
But
so, Randy, bring it home for us here.
Well, the other thing that on that point, though, Brian, is we are not anti-public cloud, Azure, AWS hosting, but we also recognize there's a lot more variable cost to that. And we're seeing firms who move to the cloud saying, you know what, these cloud costs are getting out of control. We're going to have to figure out a way to manage those. And so near and dear to our heart has also been materials that Brian and I have been writing. So we thought summarizing this suite versus best of breed thinking for you today might be helpful as you're trying to make decisions that affect your firm for 2026 and beyond. As ever, we're glad to have you with us in Accounting Technology Lab and look forward to having you listen again in the very near future. Good day.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.